Hi everybody, thank you for joining today's Science Blogging Webinar Part 2. This is part of a Future Earth pop-up communications webinar series that aims to give researchers the communication skills and tools for engaging with a wider audience. My name is Michelle Kovacevic, and I've been working as a science communicator for the past 10 years and spent a lot of that time editing scientists' writing and helping them become better blog writers, as well as doing some writing in science journalism myself. And today I will be working with my colleague Owen Gaffney, who might just quickly introduce himself as well, to talk about some of the stories we've received in the past few days. Owen, did you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Owen Gaffney. I'm sitting here at the Stockholm Resilience Centre, where I am Director of International Media and Strategy. I also work for Future Earth as a communications consultant, which is so I've got two offices. One's just up the road at the Royal Academy of Sciences. I'm pointing that way because it is that way, but that won't make any sense to anyone watching. Yeah, so I'm a journalist and writer. My background is in astronautic engineering, but I've been working in the media for about 15 years now, and particularly in science communications for about a decade.
Fantastic, thanks Owen. So in the first blogging webinar that was 2 weeks ago, we talked about finding and structuring your science stories. And then we asked you to go away and practice that by writing a story of your own and submitting it to us for some feedback. We've picked 3 of those submitted stories that we received, and we'll be discussing them as case studies today. So today's webinar will be more like an editorial meeting, and all of you should have been sent the 3 blog stories that we're talking about, and we would love for you to join that conversation. So as we discuss each blog story, feel free to share your thoughts and questions via that chat box on the left-hand side that you will see, and we will take your questions as we discuss each story and take those questions and comments on board. So we'll be discussing that throughout today's webinar. We also want this to be a safe learning space, so please keep your comments and questions constructive in this sort of spirit of learning and improving the stories that we're discussing today. And depending on how we're going for time, we'll also maybe quickly touch on live blogging towards the end of today's webinar. So without further ado, we're going to start with a blog called A Short History of Climate Conference Politics, which was written by Mohammed Al-Saidi, who is a PhD candidate at the Cologne University of Applied Sciences in Germany. And I will then pass over to Owen and Mohammed to discuss that blog story.
Oh, okay. First of all, thanks, Mohammed, for sending in your blog. It was excellent. But do you want to tell us a little bit about the blog, why you wrote it, your sort of expertise in this area, how you felt about it? I think all our participants have got the original version, and I did an edit of it yesterday evening, and I've sent it to Mohammed, and I'll put it up on the screen in a bit. But first, maybe just talk us through your thinking on writing it.
So Mohammed, you'll need to unmute yourself, sorry.
So first, thank you, and thank you, Michelle, for inviting me. Thank you for the webinars. I really enjoyed the first one, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to send the blog article and the edit that you sent me yesterday. It is very comprehensive. Yeah. The blog idea, actually, I wanted to talk about this topic of climate conferences, which is a very dry topic. It's a very difficult topic to follow in the news, and it's a topic that I have been following for some time. Actually, I'm not a PhD candidate. I finished my PhD a couple of years ago, and now I'm teaching classes on climate governance, like environmental governance, and it is very difficult to tell the story of climate conferences to my students because it's very dry topics, a lot of politics, a lot of meetings, and I wanted with the blog to write a story, like a short history of these conferences from the point of view of drama. What are like any political field. There are a lot of people shouting at each other, a lot of drama, and this was the angle view that I tried to use to make this dry story maybe more interesting.
Yeah, okay, and it is. I mean, I think my overall comments are that you chose an extremely difficult subject to write a blog on. It's extremely important, but it is very, very dry, and it's so. What I liked about your blog is that you made a huge effort to think through how to have a very strong narrative in here, to introduce characters, to enliven it, and to get this sense of drama, which is absolutely no mean feat. I mean, it's but the key things for me was you made it. It's very topical. First off, it's very topical. We've got the COP21 meeting coming up soon, so people are thinking about this. There's a lot of people writing about it. So providing a good background history on it is really useful. I think you provided two titles for it. The first one was a short history of climate conference politics, and the second title, Make or Break Moments of Climate Conference Politics. And by far, I guess the better title is the second title, this Make or Break Moments. I mean, it sounds far more active, far more dramatic than a short history. I mean, and it's really the second title is really looking more at the audience. What will actually interest the audience? What kind of things? What kind of wording will engage them? And a history of climate politics will probably turn off quite a. That probably sounds like a fairly dry policy review type article, more of an academic type article. Make or Break Moments sounds more engaging from the start. So I think you've got that right from the beginning. It's a very long article. It's sort of, I guess many blogs would be, the sort of ideal length might be 700-800 words or so, because people are reading them at their own volition. So and the longer it is, the more difficult it is to structure. It has to be really, really tightly structured to engage people. But I think actually you've done a very good job of doing that. Again, bringing in the drama of it, the characters. First off, you don't. So structurally, you don't start with the beginning of climate politics. You could start in the 1980s and just take people chronologically through this time period, and that would probably be quite boring. I mean, there's some. What you did was you homed in right at the start on an absolute key event that most people would know about, this Barack Obama's intervention in the 2009 Copenhagen summit. So that's your starting point, and then you expand from there to something to bring in to tell the whole story, and you jump back and forward in time in quite a clever way. To do that, and I think that's good storytelling, and it's almost like a sort of film structure as well, where a film would start off with a piece of high drama, and then might have flashbacks to build up the picture of how you arrived at that drama, and then take the story forward into the future. What happens to these characters, etc. And characters, you bring in a whole range of characters in here: Evo Morales, Hugo Chavez, Lumumba, Stanislas Dieping. The U.S. negotiator Paula Dobriansky, Nadarev Sano, and all, and it's super important. I mean, some of these characters won't be known to people, and you give them some sort of life there. So I think I really liked that aspect of it. I really liked the fact that you brought in some catchy phrases, some memorable phrases in here. Make or break moments, and for a make or break conference. And Lima and Warsaw conferences, they were, they made minor progress, but with major drama. So I think all good. I'm going to flick my screen on now, I think, if I can find a way of doing it. Let's see. Yeah. So I'll share my screen, because then I had a few sort of specific comments on the text. So yeah, so I think maybe people can see this. So the very opening sentence, though, the opening paragraph, it's a bit boring. It's a bit dull because it's a long, stumbling sentence taking you through this bureaucracy of the United Nations, and basically, you know, the general public, or most people, aren't that interested in meetings per se, and an article starting off saying, starting off with something like, at the third meeting of the United Nations Conference of blah blah blah, on such and such a date, on such and such a time, did this. I mean, you know, journalists try to make it sort of a lot sharper and try to avoid some of the sort of really boring kind of text right at the start. So I mean, I edited this to, you know, Obama has a strong sense of drama. His last-minute arrival on the final day of the 2009 Copenhagen summit was the make or break moment at a make or break conference, and then just bringing people sort of straight into the action. Again, then your second paragraph, it was a little bit. It was useful background information, but it didn't actually drive the story along. So I just deleted that. It's about the people in the room at a famous photograph of the summit, and so the rest of it. I mean, I didn't restructure it. I actually, when I started editing it, I thought the structure actually worked well. As I said, sort of moving backwards and forwards in time, and I quite liked that. And one of my key edits really is that I mean, many academics write in the third person or in the passive sense, in the passive tense. So, for example, in this sentence here, the original was you know, people from developing countries were angered by the draft text. You know, and I put leaders from developing countries exploded, you know, when they saw the draft text or so. So it's making it, you know, far more active. Which is like a sort of standard sort of journalistic editing on these things, and yeah, since and I broke up quite a few of the paragraphs into much smaller paragraphs, you know, just one or two sentences in each paragraph, and again making each one, you know, sound sort of active. The next one, as the summit collapsed towards failure, Obama dropped in to navigate. So generally, yeah, the edits here, I guess I've made some quite extensive edits throughout it, but I think the idea and the execution of it have largely been really good. But I'll pass over to you for some thoughts.
Just unmute yourself again, Mohammed, please.
Yeah, I was mentioning it's exactly as you have explained it. It was very difficult to find, like to think the structure where to start, and I choose the Copenhagen Summit of 2009 because it is the moment when Obama came. 1 year after he was elected as a president, he at the end he tried to save the conference, or he saved the conference. It would have been a collapse, and there was this picture that I talked about in this paragraph. It was yeah, it's a picture taken with Obama on the last day of the summit, talking with other world leaders and try to convince them to make something out of the conference, and to give a sense of drama. And then I used Obama. I talked then about other characters, and for example, in the last conferences, in the last COPs, and also on this one, the Pope is very active, talking about climate change and so on. And yeah, I noticed from your corrections that which helped me a lot, that I use maybe too long sentences or some passive tense, and it's very helpful to see how to change this. So I was very, it was very helpful when I read your comments. And yeah, for me, one difficulty was to, the aim was to tell the story of the climate conferences while making it more interesting, and by highlighting these dramas, these calling names, big personalities intervening. But at the same time, I wanted to convey the message that still we have in climate conferences the usual political discussions and so on, while the issue is very important, climate change and so on. And each conference is a success in comparison to the conference before that, but it doesn't solve the whole crisis. And to convey this message that climate conferences aren't interesting. This is the first message, and the second message: climate conferences they treat global warming not as serious as it should be treated. I wanted to do this at the end, but I think it was not possible to tell the two stories in the same blog article.
Yeah, I mean that's a key thing that a lot of people, I guess, when they start writing blogs or op-eds and commentaries, first they try to put everything into it, but really you just need one strong narrative, and to just keep with that strong story and save other ideas for other articles. I mean that's a key thing. Yeah, on the short sentences, absolutely. If you want to write a page turner, you have to use really short sentences. If you want people to read and read fast, you'd have just one idea per sentence. Each paragraph is just 3 or 4 sentences long, with just one idea in that paragraph, developed through those sentences, and then move on to the next idea. And not too many clauses, etc. But I think by and large the message came through very clearly that climate conferences are not going to solve the world's problems. It is going to be, it's more complex than that. We've seen for 20 years that they get bogged down mired in so many difficulties, and then a lot of action happens elsewhere. And meanwhile, the climate is changing very dramatically, and giving more reason for concern. So I mean this all plays out for a really interesting blog. Actually, I mean I think we'd have no problems at all running this on the Future Earth blog.
Oh, and I'd like to throw a question at you. Well, it's actually a comment from the audience. It's from Denise, saying that the first paragraph should answer the question, why should I care? Can you tell us a bit about how this blog does that, or how your edit has helped this blog to do that?
Yeah, I'll check to see if it does. Yeah, I mean the so what question is the big question in journalism. So any sort of news article should start off with with answering that question. So what? Why should I care about this? Why does it matter to me? So blog articles and feature articles can sort of build up to that a little. Can take a little bit more time to build up to that. I mean, they're in a slightly different format. So I mean, do we have it in here? We probably could bring it up a bit higher. We probably could say something in the first couple of paragraphs about the Paris conference coming up in a few months' time, which is just such a big media event. It's already generating a lot of interest, and make it far more current than this. But I guess so what is the sort of the drama here on these for these big conferences. But yeah, I hope that is helpful.
Fantastic. We don't have any further questions from the group about this one. Just some comments around how the drama is really good and the up and down sort of that drama. So I don't know, Owen and Mohammed, are you sort of happy with that? Is there any final comments you want to make before we move on to the next blog?
No, sounds good.
Great. And if you have any questions as we go, maybe you think of something you'd like to add, a comment for Mohammed about his story or for Owen, please just do type those in the chat box and we can take those on. Okay, great. So without further ado, we'll move on to the next story, which was written by Ben Delbere, I hope I said that correctly, who is the head of program operations at the European Centre for Nature Conservation. And his story is called "For Those of You Who Want to Put Ecosystem Services into Practice." So I might start off asking you, Ben, if you can tell us a little bit about sort of how you went about preparing this story. Maybe tell us about the audience you were aiming it at, some of your key messages or calls to action, and what the process you went about in terms of writing it.
Okay, try to. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you're good now.
Now you can. Okay. Yeah. Well, also thank you for giving this opportunity to blog and to learn from the first webinar, which I thought was really instructive and helpful. The reason why I say so is that I have a role in this openness project, which this blog is based on, and our role is to kind of disseminate and communicate about the outcomes of the project. But it's a very big project, large scale, many partners involved, many years of work, and a big challenge to try and link a lot of scientific partners in the project with practitioners of all kinds, policymakers, businesses, and what have you. Because the topic of the project is on operationalizing, on putting into practice the concepts, the kind of theoretical or scientific concepts of natural capital and ecosystem services. So I took this opportunity as a challenge to try and put this large and pretty complex project into a short story, try to put in some kind of logical flow into that for those who are not familiar with it, who might potentially be practitioners, which are many of us, putting ecosystem services into practice. So that's the background of why I thought this was a good challenge to try and pick up on.
And would you say that you aimed your blog at a very wide audience, or was there a sort of a specific audience you were aiming to sort of to the blog at?
No, a pretty wide audience. Assuming indeed that wherever it would be posted would have a kind of a broad range of people. Yeah.
The reason I asked that question is because I think with this story in particular, there are a couple of different angles and a couple of different key messages I think that came out for me as I read it. The first one is that you're obviously letting the reader know about a research project and the sort of the results that are being generated by that project, and you refer to some of them throughout the story. So that's one sort of obviously aim you have. The second is that you have, it seems like a new platform that you've developed called Opla that you maybe want the reader to use, and so maybe, and it comes in quite late in the story, and so I guess I'm curious as to, is that sort of the main thrust of what you'd like the reader to do? Would you like them to use this platform? Another message that seems to kind of come through in your story is understanding how the openness project can contribute to the wider policy debate in the European Union, and so whether or not there are some policymakers you're keen to sort of I guess influence or inform about the openness research and how that can sort of be worked into the policy world. So keep those kind of messages in mind that sort of come through your story. Do any of them speak to you as being the kind of key thrust of the story for you?
Well, I think Opla is indeed quite a central part of the project. Probably the reason why I put it rather at the end is that this is very much work in progress. Opla doesn't exist yet. There's a kind of a splash page existing, but the actual platform will be be launched next year probably. So just to prevent people getting too high hopes by focusing purely on Opla, I thought, well, I frame it in the story and the background thinking. Look, there's a lot of science out there in these projects. There's a lot of practical work in test cases and case studies. There's a number of stakeholder events we have with businesses, with policymakers, and what have you. And all that knowledge which comes out of this project and a related project will ultimately become available on this OPLA platform. So that's a bit the way I was thinking.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, I think. So obviously there is something happening on the horizon, and maybe when OPLA is launched, then that would become the focus of another story. So it's great. So what I'd like to just go into is the things that I think you did really well with this story. The first is that the language is by and large very accessible. It's written in quite a personal style. You use your personal voice throughout the story really well. I also really like sort of the structure of the sentences. They're short, they're sharp, and it's generally speaking quite an easy to read story. I think as well that the sort of narrative you try to bring out about what the Openness Project is about, the ideas behind natural capital and ecosystem services, and then how that all interlinks into the policy sphere and implementation, do start to come out in that story. However, I think that those concepts can be slightly strengthened, and I wanted to move into some of the things that I think we could improve and adapt with this story. And I might also share my screen so people can see. So I didn't, not like Owen, I actually didn't direct edit this story. I just put in some comments to Ben so that he could go back and have a think about how he wanted to structure the story, and come back to me with a second version of it. That's just some different ways that editors approach editing stories. So I want to start with the headline here, Ben. So it's at the moment written for those of you who want to put ecosystem services into practice. And I've made a comment here that the word ecosystem services, if you're trying to appeal to a general audience, if that isn't a concept that people understand already, we may, with that wording, that jargon, be kind of, I guess, alienating a certain part of the audience. And I guess also the way the title is worded, it sort of seems slightly exclusive. So it's for those who want to put ecosystem services into practice. If you don't want to, then don't bother reading this story. So I guess I want to get, you've had a chance to look at my comments with the title. Maybe we could workshop some other title ideas that you had. First of all, maybe you can give some reflections. Do you feel the same way with my comments on that title? And if so, have you thought of any ideas of how we could change that title up?
Yes, well, actually, this is indeed a key point that we've been discussing in the project as well. The use of ecosystem services and natural capital, which is actually what the project is more about. We kind of agreed ecosystem services probably will do the job, but you're fully right. This might put off readers already at this stage. An alternative could be to talk about nature's services or nature's benefits into practices, which kind of gives a bit more a direct connection to the readership. I must say I did have an alternative title originally, maybe that is a better one, which was putting ecosystem services into practice. What's it about? Maybe that wouldn't have a selection of the readership up front. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah,
indeed, I agree. Not using ecosystem services in the title is probably the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think, yes. So I think the concept of ecosystem services and natural capital are obviously very important in the story and need to be mentioned in the story and explained and defined. But I think, as you say, I think just taking away that, not even using the word ecosystem services in the title would be advisable. So even with your suggested other title. So something like perhaps you could sort of say, how does the environment service our needs, or something like that. I'm just thinking. And if, by the way, if anyone listening has some ideas for titles, please do feel free to type them in the chat box and let's brainstorm this together. And that's often how editors do it when they're working on stories. So potentially, I'm just thinking of some ideas out here. I mean, if you were to summarize your key sort of science message in sort of 7 words, what would those 7 words be? This is another way to throw it back at you. Which is a tricky question, I know.
It is, because you easily try to explain things. I think I like your idea of environments. environment providing services to human well-being or something.
Yeah.
Because that's
so how it could be how do environments contribute to human well-being, or something along those lines. I don't know if Owen, if you have any ideas that are coming up for you, or you can see if there's anyone in the chat box who has a great suggestion here. Does nature serve my well-being? Could be one. There's some other ideas there. So I think with headlines, it's really often you don't get them right the first time, and it might be sort of several iterations you might go through. There's a tool that I mentioned in the last webinar that's sort of it has the 10,000 most commonly used words in the English language, and that can actually be a great tool to test your headlines to make sure you're not using jargon in them. I'll have a muse on it, and if I think of some other headlines as we go, I will send through I'll type through some of those ideas. So moving from the headline into the first paragraph, I think, again, we go into that idea of assuming knowledge that the reader has. So here he's saying, perhaps it's an odd title if you have some notion of ecosystem services. So here we kind of assume the reader understands what ecosystem services are, and if they don't, they probably won't. They may not continue to read. So I think here, actually, the way I would start this article, and this comes back to a little bit deeper in the piece, you mentioned that this project has sort of the main science, or the main sort of content behind this research project is these 27 case studies that you've developed around the way in which ecosystem services are valuable in different parts of the EU. And I think coming back to Owen's point at the beginning, I mean, we connect so well with human stories and with stories of any kind. So, and I'm sure within those case studies, there are probably some amazing stories of how people have relied on the services that ecosystems provide, or how natural capital has been valued. Maybe there are pilot projects showing how that's being implemented already. So I would actually start this story with a bit more of a featurey sort of narrative style. Sort of outlining the case study, one of the case studies. So choosing a case study that you think is particularly interesting and illustrative of what the project is trying to do, and I guess telling the reader about it, and telling about the reader why that's an interesting project and how it's one of many that's being developed as part of the openness project. Now, and I've given you some links in this story as to some other blogs where they've used that. I think sometimes opening with a narrative sort of style can be challenging if you've not done it before, but it can be incredibly powerful, especially when if you know the characters personally and you can kind of bring them to life a bit. So maybe just to throw it to you, so I mean, when I say that, is there a case study in your mind that comes to your mind straight away that you think would make a really interesting way to open this piece?
Well, yes, there's a number of great case studies in there, and I think the first one coming to mind is the case in Oslo, where we kind of done valuation, not only monetary but also non-monetary valuation of ecosystem services by citizens of Oslo, kind of indicating what is green space or nature in their area worth to them in all kinds of values, and this was then mapped and used in policy locally. That would, I think, make a nice story. It would make a nice story in itself, I think, because that's
probably
something else. Maybe we could make 27 blog posts of the cases, which we are considering actually. So
fantastic, and I think that's a great idea. I think that's where you could really bring some beautiful color and example into this story by even starting it off with a case study. And I think, as you say, if you wanted to do a story on each of the different 27 case studies, you could go into more depth. If you did still want to explore the wider issues or sort of the debate around ecosystem services and biodiversity, I mean, that could just be a little taster, sort of to hook the reader in. So 2 paragraphs, doesn't have to be long, similar to maybe what Owen showed there with the Obama and the drama. You could start with an individual in Oslo who is mapping, who's deciding how to value their ecosystem services and why that's an important thing and how that's then been used in policy. So that's how I would kick it off, and then I would sort of put in the linking paragraph that sort of tells the reader why should they keep reading, why is this important, and that paragraph should be something like this example in Oslo is one of many examples being collected as part of the openness project, a project that is aiming to do blah blah blah. So kind of then linking it a bit to the wider, context, and then that can be, you can just mention it there, and then you don't have to necessarily go into the openness project in more detail. You're just flagging it for the reader that you're going to come back and talk about that in a little bit. So you can say this is part of the openness project, aiming to bring ecosystem natural capital valuation into the discussion around the way we manage land in Europe, and then you talk about, or you touch on in your story, the kind of the debate that's raging around this area. It sounds a bit controversial that there's a lot of critics, particularly in this space. And I wanted to ask you, so why is that important, do you think, to mention in the story? Why is that? Does that debate give context? Is that an important part of the message you wanted to communicate? And if so, for people like me who aren't well versed in that debate, how could you provide a little bit more context to let us really understand what that debate's about?
Well, probably adding one sentence would do the job. It's about the debate is about ecosystem services possibly being misused to focus purely on the utilitarian part of what nature serves people with, rather than the so-called intrinsic values, the values of having nature as such and having all the species on Earth. And so there's quite a debate. There's people who really resist in using the terms of ecosystem services or putting a value, a monetary value on nature. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that debate could be captured in one line to demonstrate what it's about, really. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that seems to be important background that maybe people need to understand in order to really fully comprehend the sort of ecosystem services and natural capital discussion. And I think you could also do in that same paragraph, because that is a background paragraph, define specifically what ecosystem services and natural capital are. Like, give us a sentence on each that really clearly explains what they are. Because I think you kind of refer to them and you link to, and it's great that you link to more information. That's another excellent thing that you do, so people can read more. But I think a very sort of clear definition would be good in this case. Mm-hmm. Just to link to that, so I mean, that debate and discussion, how does that relate to the openness project? Is that sort of dispelling some of has it advanced the discussion or debate? Because you refer to some new research findings.
Yeah, I think that's the link that I'm referring to here. This the attributes of biodiversity contributing to ecosystem services. That is a question that has been posed often. What are the elements of biodiversity actually contributing? And there's a lot of literature being researched and compiled into this publication, which is behind the link. So that's a key component of openness, I think. Quite a contribution. And that does have quite some elements in there which do make the case for its biodiversity as such, not just an individual species that contributes ecosystem services. It's the richness of species which often does the case. So that's quite a key component. Yeah.
Fantastic. So yeah, I would. So you've gone some way in highlighting that. I think, and maybe you can sort of give me some information here, but when I read that sentence around how the openness teams collected an impressive amount of evidence that shows these connection between biodiversity and ecosystem service provision, what wasn't super clear to me was exactly what the research findings said. So what attributes or how does biodiversity form that cornerstone of that provision? What is that paper saying? So it may be worth just adding an extra sentence, not just to say we've done research that shows that shows this, but actually telling us what that research said, so that we understand why. Because you can't assume everyone will click on the paper and read the paper. So giving us that making that link for the reader, who may be a bit lazy, of course, is important. But I love what you do there. So I think that's really good. So, going from the narrative, telling us about the openness project, defining ecosystem services and nature valuation, telling us a bit about the debate that's happening and a new research finding that furthers sort of that discussion and debate. You then go into talking about European policy and how, to my understanding, the openness project goes some way towards helping the policy discussion on ecosystem services and natural capital. And I think that, and similar to, I guess, again, Owen's story, Owen's discussion around the climate negotiations and Obama's visit, this could almost be a very topical news peg for you if that's the way you wanted to frame the story, or even to bring that out a little bit more in, halfway in through your piece. So I understand that there's some policy developments or some policy decisions being made in Europe right now, these current world events that make this research really timely. But again, for those of us who are not well versed in the EU policies around this area, it's not yet clear to me exactly how openness contributes to that policy discussion or furthers it. So maybe tell us a little bit about that and how you think you could add that into the story.
Well, yeah, okay. Probably the link would be through what also policy calls nature-based solutions. Because what I want to say in the paragraph, and maybe should make more explicit, is that all policy focus in Europe now with the Juncker administration is on growth and job creation and kind of economic sides of policy, where circular economy is in relation to environment probably the biggest priority, where we can make a connection to, meaning the research community dealing with biodiversity and ecosystem services. And a next step from ecosystem services is to nature-based solutions. How can nature offer solutions to problems in society, be it economical or otherwise? So I think that might give a clearer connection here.
And has the Openness Project got research results or some results that could actually be very specifically targeted towards those policy discussions right now? You have some messages around that? That's a really... Yeah? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please go on.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is that there will be a special policy event, a policy day in half a year's time, where we focus our policy outcomes too, which again might be another reason for an additional blog focusing on the policy aspects of openness.
Yeah, indeed. And this could be, I mean, again, so I guess coming back to the point that there's many ways you could take a certain story like this, you could equally as interestingly open this story, very quickly highlighting the sort of the key policy debate that's underway and how the Openness Project is contributing to that, or how how the Openness Project the research findings contribute to that or further that policy discussion. I want to really quickly ask Owen for his editorial opinion on this. Owen, looking at this story, hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at it. Would you kick off with the policy discussion, or would you kick off with a narrative piece around the case studies that the research has developed? Or would you start a different way, perhaps?
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think having a quick read on it, that, well, it has to start with a narrative, it has to start with a personality, a character, and that character could be a scientist involved in the work, or a case study of someone affected by these things. That's really, really important. I mean, it really does help draw people into the story. People really relate to other people, and it kind of it's just a nice way of getting people into something that can be sort of quite technical and policy wonk territory. So to engage them, you need all the tricks in the book. So opening with introducing a character or some sort of drama is really, really critical. I mean, you should just really think that every sentence you write should make the reader read the next sentence, and every word you write should make the reader read the next word. And then you start thinking, that helps you sort of structure. Well, does this sentence draw people to the next bit of the story I'm going to tell? If not, I need to get rid of it or make it more interesting or more engaging. I think there was an interesting, I can't remember, there was an editor of a US magazine said she assumes two things about her audience. She assumes they have absolutely zero time to read what she's producing, and they have zero interest. And so that as your sort of baseline, that when you start writing, then it really pushes you, it forces you to think, how am I really going to attract and engage people without exaggerating it, without over dramatizing things, but how can I use tricks and techniques to get people in?
Fantastic, thanks, Owen. So yeah, coming back to that idea of the human story, the case studies that you have, I'm sure there's some really rich content in there that we can develop. And then obviously coming back to the platform that you profile, I've sort of made some comments about how perhaps, and maybe this isn't ready yet, as you say, it's still very new, but I think what would be really interesting here is to understand a little bit better about how someone has effectively used this platform in the past, to really understand how it's useful. And that would be a good way to illustrate that platform. And maybe that's something you think about doing for the next blog when you're announcing Opera as a service for people. You could talk about how it's been used and how that information is interesting and useful. So I think just to sum up, use examples and make sure that you tell that human story through case studies that you've developed, or through the researchers telling us their story is another great way of getting a human story in there. But examples that explain what ecosystem services are, things that are descriptive and paint a picture in someone's mind, I think are really important storytelling techniques to help keep readers interested. And then make sure don't forget to set up the background and make sure the reader understands the issues. So if you're going to mention a debate, don't assume your reader understands that debate in that area, because they're not necessarily a specialist in that area. If you're going to mention a research finding, make sure you're specific about what that finding was. Just never, as Owen says, so never assume that your audience knows knows anything about the topic you're understanding, and make sure that the words that you use are descriptive and tell an interesting story. But I think this is definitely a lot of potential in this story. And hopefully this has helped you, Ben, have some thoughts about how you can take it away and maybe restructure, have a rethink about it, and submit it to us again. And we'd love to publish that on the website, help people read it.
Excellent feedback. Thank you very much. Yep.
My pleasure. Any questions or comments from the group, Owen, that anyone would like to add?
Just going through it. The group chat has been talking about storytelling and narrative. Denise has provided a link to the importance of storytelling there. And there's been a few ideas on the headlines and some banter around whether to use ecosystem services in a headline or not, and some good ideas in here. So have a look through the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you very much, Ben, for that excellent story and contribution. So to round up, we're going to move to a story called 10 Reasons for Giving a Signal Price to Carbon by Sandrine Kere. I hope I said that properly, Associate Professor at the University of Quebec. So I'll pass over to Owen and Sandrine to discuss that.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Sandrine. Sandrine, is calling in from Montreal, so it's super early there. So I'm really, really impressed. I didn't think we'd get many people from North America and South America on these on this first lot of webinars we're running. The next ones, we promise, will be at a more suitable time for you. But tell us, what was your motivation for writing it, and who was your audience, and how did you feel about writing it? Was it easy to write? Was it did you have problems?
First of all, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity of sharing this blog, and also for improving it. So I made the choice of writing that blog because it's about giving a price to carbon, which is an essential subject before the COP21. And also I wrote a paper about that subject this summer, so for me it's an opportunity of sharing my thoughts. And this blog is for a large audience.
Okay, great, and I think it's very, very topical. Again, like Mohammed's, it's right on the nail. You know, this is in the media right now and will be so for the next few months. So you know, my thoughts on it. Well, I really like it. I mean, list forms. This is like gold dust for social media, gold dust really. Anything in the list that we've realized since social media has taken off in the last few years is just clickbait. You can get order of magnitude or more clicks, viewers by having a list in the title. I've been last week I was running guest editing a series of blogs for the World Economic Forum, about 20 blogs, and most of those were in list forms, and you can see the statistics on those. The ones in lists did particularly well, better than most of the ones that didn't have a list form. So it's good. It's a good way of framing your work for sure. in fact, the Guardian has an article. I'll put a link in the chat box on it on how to make lists even more powerful and how to make your headline more powerful. For example, lists with odd numbers have a 20% higher click-through rate. And in terms of titles, they say 8 words is the ideal length. That gets more clicks through. On the content, the topic, excellent, big issue. On the title, we have signal price here, and I'm not sure you explain signal price in the article. But just tell me what it's putting a price on carbon, but is it any more than that? Do you have a specific definition of that?
Yes, of course, and I realize with your comments that, of course, I took it for granted that people knew what I was talking about, but of course I need to add more details. So a signal price makes a price stronger because and what makes it strong is that it is agreed among all the parties.
Sorry, I didn't catch that last bit.
When we add a signal to a signal price, it makes the message stronger, and what makes it strong is that it is agreed amongst all the parties. So all the parties agree on the price.
Okay, right. So it's not putting a price on carbon in a single country like China, or regionally it is a global price on carbon. So that's the main thrust.
Yeah.
Okay. And then it also might be worth looking at then why putting a price on carbon hasn't worked so well in Europe. Well, I think that needs to be explained. So perhaps the whole article needs like two paragraphs to open it up before you get into the list. Because what I liked about it is that the article is its advocacy for a signal price. So you've just got 10 points, very, very clear. That these are the 10 reasons why we need a signal price. But because you don't provide that context, it would be good to open up a couple of paragraphs saying what is a signal price and why has the EU pricing not worked so well, or considered a failure? Is it because they didn't put it wasn't a global signal price, for example, in there? So that would be my first point. And describing that carbon, even more basically, one of the issues that we have is that carbon and more generally atmospheric pollution isn't included in economic markets. We pollute for free. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I totally agree with you that I need to add an introduction to define what is a signal price, and then to maybe to change the order of my list, because I say that the first item was it make us realize the anthropogenic impact we have on climate change. So in that I was thinking it was enough to talk about pollution, but you're right, I need to add more details.
Yeah, I think changing the list order would be good. I mean, because then you can actually tell the story through the list order of explaining what and provide definitions every time you bring in a new piece of jargon. And each bullet point will then lead the reader naturally onto the next bullet point, and at the moment it seems it jumps around a bit, so you can just use that format to tell the story. Then on your second bullet point you talk about stowaways, and I think probably, and I think this is a nice metaphor for the free riders in economic theory and in game theory, but you don't quite explain it. It probably needs sort of a further explanation, and then there might be sort of a mixed metaphor in there that we're fighting stowaways. That we have to be sort of careful about how we use these metaphors. Metaphors are super powerful. Actually, they really help people remember a story. and remember other details about the story that aren't part of the metaphor. So, I mean, absolutely think through using as many metaphors, but be careful how to use them.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that I need to explain more, because when I put stowaways, for me, I knew what it was meaning, but I need to add more explanation. But initially, I wanted to keep each paragraph quite short. So now I'm going to add a few sentences.
Okay. And then on point 4 talks about access to technology, and I thought this was a bit of a mental leap, as there is no explanation of the mechanism to go from carbon pricing to technology access, but presumably there's the money raised from the carbon pricing goes to knowledge sharing, but I guess there's some assumed knowledge there that we need to explain to a broader readership to give it that kind of context.
Yes, and also the point number 8, which gives some explanations, yes, should be put before the point number 4, because on point number 8 I was explaining that what you're just asking me about, you know, because signal price will facilitate step by step the transition to a post-fossil fuel world of clean energies. And a global carbon pricing system will provide revenues available to develop renewable energies and promote sustainable development. Yes, so I need to change the order of the items.
Okay, and then I was thinking, you know, some of the points, it could be condensed down further, particularly if it's really important to get an odd number of bullet points for clickbait. That point 5 seems to be a repeat of the earlier points, and in fact there's a few points in here that could be probably condensed down into one point.
Yeah, but on point 5 I wanted, for me it was different to point 1, because in point 1 I was talking about the pollution effect mainly, and in point 5 I thought I was emphasizing that we can get along all together, so more of that we could all agree on something.
Okay, on sort of the global cooperation.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you mentioned it prevents financial speculation, and that's a good point to make. Does it? I guess it's how does it prevent the speculation? I thought we might still see a bit of speculation in there.
Yeah, because carbon markets, which are cap and trade systems, they can use auctions. So if we stop, if we provide a given price, there will be no more auctions, neither gambling on a carbon market. And in the European, you know, the emission trading system, there has been some fraud, because some criminals they took the opportunity of buying permits in countries where there was no VAT, which is value added tax, and then they were selling those permits in countries that did not have that had that tax, so they were making money out of it.
Okay, yeah, I'm aware of the time here. So the final point, you need to say earlier that the money reinvested in tech transfer that needs to come earlier in the story to make sense of some of the other points, I think. And then my final point was the image at the end that you provided, which is very good. I mean, very dramatic image, but of a DuPont chemical plant. But that might not be CO2 emissions. It might be something else if it's a chemistry plant, and which is often an issue, or that you have smokestacks and you have imagery of stuff going up into the atmosphere. Some very, very dramatic images in there, but you'll always find people pointing out that are they, you know, is that water vapor going into the atmosphere, or is that CO2 emissions? And yeah, we just need to be quite careful about that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Okay, but thank you so much. I mean, I think it's great. I think lists really work in blog posts. We found that on the Future Earth blog and the Road to Paris blog and the World Economic Forum. So as a format, it's definitely a winner, and the topic is great. So yeah, I'm looking forward to publishing this once we've done some edits on it. So thank you so much, Sandrine. I'll pass over to Michelle.
Yeah, thanks, Owen.
Fantastic. Great discussion, and we've had some good discussion on the chat box too. I just wanted to put some of those out before we close up the webinar. There was a suggestion from Michelle Lim for the title of this being 10 reasons for a global price on carbon. She said she found the words global price easier to understand the issue than signal price. Maybe something to think about there. Benjamin had a question about the attractivity of blogs. So he said, is there any examples that we know of where the research results are not front and center, but actually it's more about the process of research? Hopefully I've conveyed that properly. I don't know if you've got any comments on that.
If the process...
Does the process of research make a story but before the actual project is finished and has results?
Yeah, well, I suppose traditionally in journalism the answer is rarely, maybe even it's rarely. I mean, so in fact, when you try to write an article, you normally just cut out the whole methodology, which is usually the biggest section in the academic research paper, and you focus on the key conclusions, the outcomes. So but you know, in some of the work we do, particularly in sort of global sustainability research, we're very privileged. We get to go to very interesting places to carry out the research, for example, and that can make a very good story in its own right, without doubt, because you've got sort of unique access to some people, luckily, to Greenland ice sheet or Amazon rainforest or wherever it may be, or to to different cultures and people that can create good stories. And generally the methodology, though, you have to work really hard to make that interesting to people. I guess some methods will lend themselves more to it than others, and it's worth thinking about how to make it interesting. That's a challenge in itself, and it's like and it could be a sort of unique reading experience if you can get it just right.
Fantastic answer. Just to add to that, also have seen some really great stories that have gone to the field where research is being conducted, and those can make for excellent human stories. But yeah, they are a bit harder sometimes than the big hard news story of a really exciting new research finding. I wanted to wrap up by actually, I know we have a lot of comments but not enough time, unfortunately, but we can continue this discussion on Twitter. Wrap up with Asha Mins, who has shared 9 storytelling narrative techniques that Aristotle identified. Actually, 7 that Aristotle identified, and some people who say that now there are 9. And he says that they are triumph over adversity, fight between good and evil, rags to riches, quest or detective story, voyage and return, comedy, tragedy, rebirth, or redemption. So he says choose one of those narrative structures and stick to it in your story. Something we could obviously discuss more about on Twitter as well. But unfortunately we've run out of time, and so we need to wrap up. We didn't get to touch on live blogging today, but I've prepared some slides with some resources that I will send to all of you via email, and hopefully you will find interesting, and we'll also post on the Future Earth SlideShare page, and this video will also be made available on the Future Earth YouTube channel. Before we wrap up, we did want to say that while we did advertise that this is was a one-time only opportunity for you to submit your stories and get feedback on them, we are really happy for more of you to submit your stories to the Future Earth platform for consideration for publication and getting some feedback on your story style. You can do that by submitting to futureearth2025@gmail.com. So please do send us your stories around science and sustainability, and we'd love to consider those for publication. Otherwise, the next webinar that we'll be running will be on October the 14th at 3 p.m. CET, or 3 p.m. Paris time, on finding the visual story in your data, which will be a very interesting and fantastic and very under-discussed topic amongst science communication, I think. So please do join us then. You can sign up for that at the futureearth.org/blog website. Otherwise, it's been a pleasure to discuss the blogs with you. Thank you to Owen, Ben, Mohammed, and Sandrine for letting us discuss and share and pick their stories. And thank you to all of you for your fantastic comments. We look forward to more of these webinars discussion with you in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.